Welcome to my session. I'm assuming everyone can hear me. Okay. So I'm going to speak about spatial structures and the importance of photography. I will start by saying that I'm an amateur photographer. I'm a professor of architecture, and I have need of images, and I have need of things to use for my students. But sort of the biggest thing that I can say is that the best camera is the one that you have with you. Because I travel a lot, I go to a lot of conferences with a lot of architectural colleagues, particularly before the days of cell phone, and they would never have a camera with me and would always comment, wow, you have such great photographs. And it's, you know, if you don't have a camera with you, you can't take them. So the camera that I have used for the past few years is a Nikon D7100. I have an 18 to 300 millimeter zoom lens, which has been indispensable in accessing details of photographs, which I'll show you more. And then recently upgraded my cell phone to an iPhone 12 Pro, which also takes some pretty good photographs, but nonetheless, it lacks that really, really good zoom lens, which you'll see is pretty important in my work. And, you know, why take photos? I use them in my lectures. I teach building construction, architecturally exposed structural steel, and environmental design at the School of Architecture at the University of Waterloo. And so a lot of my lectures are very image-based. I use them in my professional presentations. I do a lot of presentations at conferences and continuing education for architects and engineers. And I've also written 4 books with Werkhauser on steel structures. You can see the cover pages there. And honestly, it's an avoidance of copyright issues, and it's simply a lot more fun to travel to take the photographs than to pay a photographer maybe $500 a piece for photographs. When I have 600 photographs in my books, there is no way, if we take 600 times 500, that my royalties would in any way cover the photographs in the books. Most people know a project by one classic image. I'm sorry, this is not a spatial structure by any means, but everybody knows falling water. And there is an actual worn spot with an X on it on the ground where everyone walks to take the classic shot. But the problem with the classic shot is it's a recognition shot, but it doesn't show the details. It doesn't show the materiality, the texture, or the flaws of a project. So when I'm taking photographs, I try to be thorough. I make sure when I went to Falling Water, there were 2 prices for the tour. There was a $20 tour, in which case you were not allowed to take photographs. And there was a $60 tour where you were allowed to take photographs. So obviously, I chose the more expensive tour with less people in it, so they're not cluttering my photographs as well, but so that I could have the takeaway to share with my students with a very, very thorough look at a project. I also tend to do a lot of what I call pilgrimages. So there's all the sort of classic or important works that we know of through the history of architecture. And rather than relying on photographs from books, which put me at a distance from the project, not knowing really anything more than my students could read in the very same book, I like to go and visit the project, touch the project, you know, look at it from different angles so I can really appreciate, even over time, how a project has endured or perhaps not endured so well. And I always like to be super thorough. I document a building as if I may never be able to see it again. And because of COVID, it's really coming very much home to me that there are many, many places that I will never be able to get back to. And so if I'm there the daytime, the nighttime, the Seville Parasol, it was closed when I visited at night. I made sure that before I had to leave town the next morning, I ascended it so that I could walk around it and see it quite thoroughly. So the areas of focus, really in my structural photography, of course, everybody takes finished shots. That's what everyone is looking for. But I learn more about a project myself by going to the shop and seeing the fabrication and process, by going to the construction site and getting permissions, which are very difficult sometimes, to see sort of the erection and construction sequence. And in many cases, I will go back, every week, every 2 weeks, every couple of days when something's happening, so that I can document that part of the project. One of the really interesting aspects I find when I'm looking at structures and construction is the details, the processes, and the people. The people are so important. And what I try to convey to my students, and even when I'm educating architectural practitioners, everything we do when we design, somebody else has to build. So we impact the feasibility, the constructability, the safety of people. I think safety of people is so important. And just some things are more difficult than others. This is Daniel Libeskind's Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto, which was one of the early very chaotic diagrid structures. So in a sense, somewhat a spatial structure, but with extraordinarily heavy members, really difficult to put together. This is the Leslie Dan School of Pharmacy by Foster's office. And if you'd only gone to see the project bottom right corner image when it was finished, you wouldn't know how those pods were put together. But I went to the fabrication shot, I went on site, I saw the erection, I saw all the different innovative processes that they had to go through in order to assemble those and shift them and lift them into place, which was really quite fascinating. I also make a practice when I do site visits of trying to find different viewing angles so that I can get a different perspective. So for the Munich Olympic Stadium, I went up the sightseeing tower so I could take shots looking down at it. And, zoom lens, how close can I get in to see what it looks like on the roof? Bought the tour again to go in to see the underside, because a lot of particularly stadiums aren't open to just wander through unless there's an event going on or you have a ticket. But the other thing that I found I could do was to walk on the roof. But it was Munich, it was a Sunday, and you needed to have closed shoes. It was summertime, and I had to sort of beg my way on wearing sandals, which wasn't particularly the safest thing I could have to walk on a roof. But nonetheless, I really wanted that sort of full-on experience of getting really close to see how it was put together. This is just a beautiful structure in London, the addition to King's Cross Station. But what my lens would let me see were the close-up details, which some people would look at those details and go, well, that is just the ugliest steel I've ever seen put together. But when you think about the viewing distance, and this is where my work in architecturally exposed structural steel specification systems, that's a reasonable detail because it's viewed so far away. So from far away, you can't see those details. So a lot of what I try to work with in my photography is examining things up close so I can learn about it, and then understanding the realities of the construction aspects afterwards. I was working on my Diagrid Structures book in 2013 and had the pleasure and the honor of sitting in Arup's office for a week. They gave me access to their libraries and photographs and things, but even they couldn't get me into that construction site, even though they were the project engineers. And so I'm left to, again, use the photographs in order to understand it. So viewing it from afar, I went up the shard, which had just opened, so I could get the shot looking at the full sort of diagrid sloped face. And then, using the zoom lens to get up to see some of the details. And that little sort of green detail was a leveling system that was in place. I have had the honor of going to the UAE a couple of times in the past few years. So the Al Bahar Towers, I remember going by these when they were under construction and didn't even know what they were, but they were interesting. So I photographed them. and then, you know, went back a couple of years later when they were almost finished and managed to talk my way into a site tour by IASS project architect on site, so I could see them up close. And one of the things about construction tours that's really important in sort of fact finding and as an experiential point of view is that once the building is given over to a client, in this case it belongs to a bank, and the sheikh has offices at the top, you don't get into the building anymore. So construction tours are really important. One of the best organizations that facilitates some of the most amazing construction tours is the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat. So I usually go to their conference every year and sign on for the interesting tours. So we went to Suzhou, saw they call it the Pants Building. From another building we got to see under construction, but actually managed to go up to the top of that one and be able to see the whole structural system as it was being put together, the state of the site, the type of scaffolding. So again, a really interesting and learning experience. Likewise with the CTBUH, was able to access the construction of Shanghai Tower on 2 separate occasions. When it was at this state, where we were able to go out on the deck and look straight down through that yellow mesh at so many floors up, which was really interesting and a bit terrifying. And as well, understand how the glazing systems, et cetera, were going in, because you could see that work in progress. And so these are some shots of the inside. And again, once the building is given over, you don't have access to these kind of spaces. Like, what does the outrigger floor look like, which is the refuge floor? And so for lattice structures, again, there's only so much one can see standing on the ground. And so I use the telephoto lens as my way to find details and to understand how things are made by looking at them up close. So again, I can use these photographs in my books, share them with my students so we can understand how things go together and how things are being designed. Another point I would make about construction photographs versus finished photographs is that buildings, until they're demolished, will always be finished. If you can access them, great. But construction photographs are learning opportunities, and they're very temporary. So once that phase is passed, it can't be retrieved. We did manage, when I was in Beijing, to get a site tour of the Phoenix International, which is one of the most parametrically designed buildings in the world, at least at the time. But again, being able to get inside and tour around the building enabled me to understand better how it was put together, what materials were used, and what was involved in the process. As well, in Beijing, one of the things I do to access buildings, unlike real photographers that charge money for the buildings, I give firms my buildings in exchange for site visits. I'll say, okay, SOM San Francisco, you can't get to this building. I'm going to be in Beijing. I'll go in, I'll do a tour, and as an architectural professor, they're relatively trusting of you. I bring my hard hat, I bring my boots, and then I'll give you my photographs in exchange for access. And so this was a really fascinating project to be able to go in and up to. Now, one of the issues, of course, with site access, you can't always get it. Telephoto lens only goes so far. I was at a conference in Dalian, China, and the image on the top is what the air looks like in Dalian. I was staying at the complete other end of the city. I speak absolutely no Mandarin except hello and thank you. So I walked across the city to see this and found that the barriers to the site were really far away. And when I got home, I couldn't see anything. And so then I started to figure out, well, how do I clean up the images? Because one of the things with my kind of photography, I'm very busy with teaching. I don't have time to fuss with images. I might straighten them or crop them, but that's about it. There's no time. And so how do I clean the air? And so what I found, and how I got the bottom image from the top image, and this is my takeaway from photography, if you go into Photoshop and look at the left image and the right image is a lot clearer and contrast is better, you just hit auto color. and auto color will strip the smog away. It's environmentally, I wish we could just do this and just go to cities and just hit auto color and the smog would be gone. But it is remarkable what auto color can do. And the other thing, when I'm accessing projects from tall buildings, most photographs you take, particularly the one on the left with cell phones, because cell phones are really terrible for understanding what glass does to the photograph. Everything looks green. And so you hit the photograph on the left with auto color and it strips away that false greenness that you get looking through glass. So that's my freebie, how to fix your photographs really fast. But it's still, in my opinion, sort of garbage in, garbage out. The same with video. You have to shoot something that's halfway decent to begin with. So taking photographs is my way of finding out more about buildings. I can look at them in greater detail later if I don't have the time. If I'm really thorough, then I have lots of data and information that I can examine later. They really form part of my experience of a place. And the students like my lectures because I'm full of anecdotes. There's a lot of buildings that I don't get permission to go into properly. And so sometimes if the site's open, if the door's open, I'd rather go in and ask forgiveness, because usually if you ask permission, everyone just says no. And I have to have more experience than they can have out of their textbook, because otherwise I really have no value as an educator. And really, photography is how I enhance my experience of life. And sometimes you just have to be right place and look up information. I follow Arch Daily, look at their data. And I was driving in Japan. My daughter lives in Japan. And, we were leaving Hiroshima. And I saw an article come up about this little curly-Q chapel on the left-hand side. And you look at Google Maps and you go like, wow, like it's a bit off-road, but we're going by that. And so, we managed to get a tour of that project. And the other one is also in Japan. It's on the top of a mountain. And it's just, like just trying to source information to find out about interesting projects I think it makes travel a lot more interesting to me and meaningful to my students. So yeah, that's my sort of more or less parting shot. I managed to get to the top of 432 Park Avenue before all the other needle towers went up, because I was photographing the tuned mass damping system for the steel fabricator. But that's another place that never going to get to the roof of that building again. So a plug for my books. I always have to do that. My website is just tboake.com, and I'm also on Instagram. And thank you very much.